Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Health and Wellness. Today, I have a topic that is so important and is impacting so many people's lives. I had the pleasure of meeting my guest, Dr. Ramani Durvasala. She is a psychologist. She's on YouTube at Dr. Ramani, and I met her at an event, and she was talking about everything you wanted to know about narcissists, and some things maybe you didn't. And I thought to myself, this has to get out to my audience. Dr. Ramani, thank you so much for saying yes to me.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm always grateful for any forum where I can help people understand this and enlighten them to this.
Well, I happen to know how deep and wide and impactful your information is. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn over the mic to you and have you begin to share with us your mission and your message in informing people about narcissism, what it is, what it's not, and what to look for. And then really, how do we, the non-narcissist, live through that, overcome it, and become healthier in our relationships?
So, narcissism is one of the most misunderstood words, concepts, ideas out there, not just by the public in general, but frankly, by the mental health profession. And the reason that is such a concern is that when people do go into, they finally show up at a therapist's office, they may still feel like they're not getting the answers they want. Because I truly believe if you understand this, you actually are in a position through education to enable yourself to make some difficult decisions or engage in some painful acceptance about how to proceed. So to start from the very basic point on this, which is what is narcissism? The mistake many people have always made is like, it's somebody who's in love with themselves and likes to stare in the mirror. It's actually the opposite of being in love with yourself. People who are narcissistic are pathologically insecure. They care to an extreme level what other people think about them and are constantly doing things to protect themselves from any kind of injury or wound to that insecure core. Think about it. Think of it as somebody who had like a leg that broke in multiple places, right? Never in life is that leg probably going to work as well as they want, and the weather, or if they take the steps the wrong way, it can get binged and banged and hurt. And so they're always moving very carefully to protect their leg. View that with narcissists, but they're always doing that to protect their fragile egos. So what it is a pattern, a long-standing, pervasive pattern, and it's characterized by things like very, very variable, inconsistent empathy, often non-existent empathy, entitlement, grandiosity, arrogance, chronic validation and admiration seeking, superficiality, like just only caring about surface level appearances and what other people think, as well as other things like hypersensitivity. So they can dish it out, but they sort of can't take it. They're people who are often very envious of other people, very covetous of what other people have. They can be very jealous. And there's different kinds of narcissism. And that becomes something I hope to get to today, because it's very important to understand that when we think about, even if a person knows what narcissism is the way I just described it, they often think of it as the traditional grandiose narcissist who walks in with the perfect suit and the perfect look and has the great job and has a great car and has a great life and certainly sells and spins themselves as somebody who's all that. And yet, if you're in an intimate or close relationship with them or a family relationship, you get to see the dark side. You see the part of them that's invalidating and cold and cruel. And yet the world may actually have a very different image or experience of this person. And we'll talk about why that is too. But that's the traditional classical grandiose narcissist. And they're often very entertaining. Lots of celebrities are like this, lots of famous people, politicians, business leaders. Like, they suck all the attention out of the room. They're very charming. They're very charismatic. And that's why they often win people over. I often say to people, listen, if you meet someone charming and charismatic, you might actually want to take a few steps back and drink this person in, because it can be actually more tricky than you think. But there's other forms of narcissism. And the one that's probably the most misunderstood, but very, very important for people to understand, particularly women, is the form of narcissism called covert or vulnerable narcissism. Interestingly, covert and vulnerable narcissists are just as grandiose and entitled and all that other stuff, but their because it's called covert because it's not in your face. They're very victimized. They always are woe is me. They feel that life gave them a bum deal and they complain about it all the time. So their stances are often quite passive aggressive, and they might be saying things like, oh my God, I shouldn't have to be working so hard. That guy got that promotion. He didn't deserve that promotion. I deserve this. I deserve that. I never got a good leg up. That guy had a trust fund. It's always woe is me. Someone else has it better than me. Very victimized, but also they really don't have the empathy, and their entitlement doesn't come up in the way of, like, the grandiose narcissist will say, I deserve to be a VIP. I should be in the front of the line. I should get the best suite at the hotel. I shouldn't have to wait. I shouldn't have to wait longer than anyone else for my order. Like, they should do whatever they want. For the covert narcissist, their entitlement comes out as, I don't understand why a genius like me has to degrade himself or herself by going to a job. They really take that stance of, like, they're deserved very special treatment because of their unsung genius, and no one sees how wonderful that they are. And again, they're chronically victimized. Because covert narcissists don't present as charming and charismatic and grandiose, in fact, they often present initially as kind of, I hate to say it, but almost pathetic and victimized. Many people almost feel compelled to try to rescue them. Like, oh, if only this person did get the opportunities they deserve, then everything would be great. And then they realize there's nothing that ever elevates this person. Many therapists get tricked by covert narcissists and think that they're only depressed. Now, many covert narcissists are depressed, but they have both patterns happening at the same time. And honestly, the depression may resolve. So now they have a little bit more energy to walk around and say how victimized they are. Still, the victimization becomes a big theme. Another form of narcissism, and this is probably the most bleak, dark, and dangerous form of narcissism, is called malignant narcissism. Malignant narcissism is sort of the last stop on the train before you hit full-blown psychopathy. These are people who are exploitative, they're very manipulative, they're very prone to lying, they coerce other people to do what they want, they will use other people to achieve what they want, and then maybe they feel that tiniest bit bad, but it's pretty tiny. By and large, what they'll do is they'll always spin the narrative to make themselves look good and feel good and what matters to them. Really, the big differences between malignant narcissism and full-blown psychopathy is that the psychopath is somebody who really feels no remorse for their misdeeds. And also, psychopaths aren't insecure. They're actually a very unique kind of a psychological, makeup where they're not even prone to stress or anxiety. In fact, they're frighteningly cool-headed under stress, not to the benefit of others necessarily, but really in the sense like they can be efficient killing machines in that way. Whereas any of us would be, the idea of harming someone is completely out of our reality. For a psychopath, they feel like, if you're in my way, I'm going to destroy you. So that's a different animal. But the malignant narcissist has a lot of the same sort of flavor and feel, and it can often be difficult to distinguish the two types because they are so exploitative. Another type of narcissist is the communal narcissist. The communal narcissist is an interesting one that also tricks a lot of people. These are the people who are the do-gooders. But the reason they are do-gooders is because they need validation. They're only doing good, as it were, to get validation. So they make the big donation, but they want a big gala in their name. They give them money, but they have to have their name in lights on front of the building. They're the Little League coaches and all that, but they do it for validation. And what many people will say is that having a relationship or having a family member who's a communal narcissist is actually kind of a nightmare, because the world often views them as hyper generous, as like people who are humanitarian and saving the world, yet behind closed doors, they're invalidating, they're dehumanizing, they're cruel, and they're emotionally and psychologically abusive. And so then it becomes hard for those people to even get support from other people who are walking around saying, oh, you're so lucky that your husband or your wife or your mother, your father's a humanitarian. And you're thinking, oh my God, like they don't see the real story. And when you try to spin it, sometimes people will actually gaslight or pathologize the person who is saying like, this is not healthy. And everyone will say, oh, what's wrong with you? They're saving elephants. They must be a good person, kind of thing. And so that particular form of narcissism has all, again, the usual, the grandiosity. I'm going to save the world. I'm going to save every elephant on the planet. It also has the entitlement. My foundation is the most important foundation. Everyone must give to me, and everyone needs to show up to my event. And it's incredibly validation seeking. There's also what I call the cultural narcissist. And this is something I've only recently been speaking about because it's been coming up a lot in with my clinical practice and people I work with, which is there are certain patterns in the world, cultures or societies that are more paternalistic, patriarchal, or authoritarian. In these particular situations, it almost becomes a petri dish for creating narcissism. People from these men, in particular from these cultures, can be very dismissive, very unemotional, be very unempathic, be very entitled. It's always their way or the highway, but it's very cultural. So they've been enabled by everyone around them, and anyone who's from that society or culture will enable that pattern. It can be very pronounced, especially in cultures that are organized that way. And it's also quite pronounced in cultures that are very economically stratified, where the haves have so much more than the have-nots. And there's really no sense of sort of public support or safety nets and all of that. The more you narrow that inequality gap, the less you'll see this cultural narcissism. And what happens is cultural narcissism is something that people often give people sort of a free pass on. They'll say, well, that's just their culture. Or, they went through a war. They were a refugee. And all those things are horrific. But as far as I'm concerned, regardless of your history, nobody gets a free pass to psychologically and emotionally abuse other people. It's just not okay. And so while I understand their history might be difficult, and many narcissistic individuals have traumatic histories, it's not unusual, it's not a free pass. Maybe that person either needs to do the work or really avoid being with other people so they don't keep harming them. And then the final form of narcissism, which is it's something sort of what I call the lowest grade, is benign narcissism. Narcissism is very much on a continuum, ranging from this is just sort of a superficial person who's constantly taking selfies and is always on Instagram and talking about their lives. And it's boring, and it's silly and it's vapid and it's empty. And they're always talking about their new handbag and their new car. And I just went to this concert and I have front row tickets to that. So their empathy is, it's not that great because that's all they want to talk about. And once you start talking about yourself, they sort of tune out. So they don't make really deep friends. Yeah, they're mildly entertaining. Like sometimes at a party, they're a great storyteller kind of thing. They're people who might be in your family. You may be unfortunate enough to have gotten in a relationship with one. So it feels very vapid and empty. They're more harmless than the other narcissists, I think, as long as you know what you're dealing with. And so where people can get a little burned by your so-called benign narcissist is that they may actually want to share of their own lives. Like they may go through a hard time and finally turn to the benign narcissist thinking it's a friend or a trusted family member. And the benign narcissist is sort of yawning and staring at their phone. But by and large, they're not rotten. They're not cruel like the malignant narcissist. So as you can see, and anyone listening is probably thinking, oh, that's interesting. Now I can see how when I talk, my mom is a covert narcissist, but my husband is a malignant narcissist. And you see how it looks different, but the impact it has on us is almost always the same. So my work and what my mission and vision is to really talk more publicly and get the mental health system on board, understanding that there is a real phenomenon called narcissistic abuse. It's what happens to any of us when we have long-term chronic contact with a narcissistic person. And that can be a partner, like a spouse or a boyfriend or girlfriend or fiance. It can be a parent. It can be a sibling. It can be a friend. It can be a boss. It can be a coworker. There is a laundry list of people who this can be. And so, but the effects are actually pretty similar. People experiencing narcissistic abuse will have a range of reactions. And most commonly, they'll experience things like confusion, self-doubt, anxiety, symptoms of depression, self-devaluation. They may become socially isolated. They may have feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, and powerlessness. And this is a unique kind of phenomenon because it's obviously not post-traumatic stress disorder, though there's a lot of shared variants with it. Because post-traumatic stress disorder can be diagnosed on the basis of one episode, one physical assault, one experience of going through a terrible natural disaster like an earthquake, and you can continue to have the symptoms off of that. Narcissistic abuse, by definition, is chronic exposure. It's also a little different than a phenomenon out there called complex PTSD, which you may have heard of, or certainly some of your listeners may have heard of. And complex PTSD results from a person being in a situation where they're being chronically abused but have no real means of escape. The three arenas where we've seen the most research and work done on complex PTSD are people who are in long-term domestic violence situations, long-term child abuse situations where they're the victim of child physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, or refugee situations where people are living in absolute uncertainty and often conditions of abuse as they're trying to flee. They're trying to flee some form of tyranny from another place that they're at. This is where the research has been done. The big difference, because there's a lot of commonality between narcissistic abuse and complex PTSD, but the big difference is people with complex PTSD tend to have a lot more difficulty with emotional regulation. They may have episodes of what we call dissociation, where they almost like cut out from themselves. And I'm only laying all of these phenomena out because as people are listening, they might say, oh, I actually might be more in a complex PTSD situation. I might be more in a narcissistic abuse situation. Narcissistic abuse can come from any kind of a narcissistic relationship. And so, like I said, it could be work, it could be family, it could be partner. And the sad thing is that if you don't know what's happening to you, especially if narcissistic abuse happened in your family of origin, you're actually at a fair amount of risk of repeating that cycle until you identify it. So it's the sort of thing where you actually think relationships are supposed to be invalidating. You actually think people are supposed to be entitled. You actually think you're supposed to be devalued because that's all you've ever known. And so then when you meet someone and these are the patterns you're seeing, instead of saying, I don't deserve this is ridiculous, and getting out, you keep making allowances for that person, thinking, oh, I've been here before, so maybe this is just how it is. And so that's often how people back into these relationships. And it's amazing. And women are particularly guilty of this, of making excuses. We're always told, like, well, look for the bright side, or maybe they're having a bad day. I'm sorry. You don't get to invalidate someone. I don't care how bad your day is. And if you do have a bad day, because none of us are perfect, and we do say invalidating things without meaning it, we quickly catch ourselves and say, I've come here to genuinely apologize. My words hurt you. And while I can't take them away, I am aware of, I'm so sorry. And it's a genuine apology. Good luck trying to extract a genuine apology out of a narcissistic person. I have not seen it happen. Narcissistic people apologize to get the problem out of the way so they can keep the trains running. This isn't about like genuine empathy. Wow, I've hurt you. It's much more the situation of like, oh my gosh, this is so inconvenient. What? So sorry? Okay, here's a sorry. And now we can just go back to how things are. That feels very, again, it feels very devaluing. It feels very dehumanizing. It's not really an apology. But as far as the narcissist is concerned, now we have an apology on record. There's the sorry. And there's a real lawyerly feel to arguing with a narcissist. Like, I've registered a sorry in the record. Doesn't that count? And that's a lot of people will feel very, very frustrated by this because it feels like being in a court of law. That's all good and well if you're a lawyer in a court of law. That is not how interpersonal close relationships or collaborative relationships of any kind should be unfolding. Another big question I get a lot of the time is, why is this such, because this seems like a big problem. Like, I've got to tell you, I've got a wait list till forever. I've got, lots of people interested in the content. And the reason it is happening and proliferating so much is, I think, A, people don't understand it, and B, people enable it. We almost want to believe that it's real. Like, no, they really mean it, or it's fine, or they're having a bad day, or they had a tough childhood, and we enable it and we don't call it out. And think of it. I think anyone watching this can think of a time they were at any kind of meeting. It could have been a volunteer meeting, it could have been a work meeting, and somebody is really behaving narcissistic and behaving very badly. And then you're waiting for someone to say something, and you're looking around the room and nobody's saying it. And afterwards, you'll think to yourself, why didn't anyone say something? And maybe even 6 months down the road, especially since these things escalate and this person starts behaving more and more and more badly, people will give a range of excuses like, I don't like conflict. No one else was saying anything. What's the point? But there's another reason. Many times when we're in the face of a very narcissistic, oppressive, unempathic person, we don't quite understand it. It's what happens to our autonomic nervous system. It's fight, flight, or freeze. And we literally freeze. Like, we're like, is this really happening? And by the time we come up with a good response, the meeting may be done. By the time we come up with a response, even in an argument with a partner who's narcissistic, the argument's already sailed. So it's sort of, we feel silly, like, oh, I just thought of a good answer. I have this happen with clients all the time. We'll do a post-mortem on an argument. I'm like, well, why didn't you try this? I'm like, darn it, that would have worked. But they're like, at the moment, I couldn't think a single clear thought. And we get almost paralyzed in the face of these individuals. So, and a huge issue is that this is a pattern that the mental health profession is not willing to call out. People ask me why, and I have no idea. But the most likely reason is that the way therapy is done in the Western world is that we focus on the person in the room. So if you came in to have therapy with me, a traditional therapist, you'd be talking, and then maybe you'd be talking about your partner. And your therapist would still keep bringing it back to you. How did you react? What did you say? How did you feel? And it very rarely will the therapist shed a light on that other person's behavior, saying, wow, that's really unacceptable, or that's really invalidating. They almost don't want to touch the other person's pattern. The sort of the prevailing wisdom is you don't diagnose a person who's not in the room. Calling someone narcissistic ain't a diagnosis. It's a description. It'd be like me calling you stubborn or friendly. You know what I'm saying? Friendly means a lot of things. It means that you're helpful, that you're laughing, that you're smiling, that you're cheerful. I mean, just like narcissism means a lot of things. It's a word. But I don't want to diagnose them. You're not diagnosing them when you call them that. Sometimes I'll even, to tamp it down, I'll say, well, that sounds very difficult. But obviously people come to me to consult on this in a very specific way. And I'll say, all right, let me break this down for you. And I'm bold in that way. And like I said, I've definitely sort of broken off from the herd in mental health, because I got to be frank with you. Once people understand what this pattern is and that they're not responsible for it, maybe by sticking around for so long, they may have inadvertently enabled it, but it's not like they woke up in the morning and say, hey, I'm ready to enable the narcissist in my life. That once they get it, they're actually in a far, far better position to say, now that I know what this is, I actually now have different responses. Because the mistakes people make with narcissists, they actually try to explain themselves to them. They try to defend themselves to them. They try to engage with them. They think, oh, maybe if we keep talking, we'll get to the other side. You're never going to get to the other side. I tell people, engage minimally. Don't talk to them. Don't explain yourself. Narcissists are obsessed with winning. It's all about winning. They do not care who they destroy as long as they win. They have to win the argument. They have to win. In a breakup, you have to be hurt more than them, because then they win. They have to get more money out of the parents' will, because then they win. It's all about winning. Everyone else is so exhausted. They're like, go take it. You need to win. Go win, you fragile ego person. Go do what you need to do. And so it really becomes, when you understand that that's what it is, it's like a child. Like, would you really go fight a baby over a rattle? No, you'd like, keep the rattle. You're a baby. And then the baby's like pretty content because they got to keep the rattle. If you view these things with narcissists like a baby with a rattle, you're like, oh, the poor thing, they just need their rattle. And you can really view them through the kind of, again, sad lens that can help you almost. The balance I'm trying to achieve for people, because one thing that I get critiqued for all the time, and it's fine, bring it, is you're being very mean to narcissists. And I'm like, I'm glad that the narcissists have their advocacy community. Everyone deserves one. I ain't in it. I said, however, will never sign off on people not being compassionate. And a lot of people start losing their compassion in these relationships. They want to fight as dirty as the narcissist. I'm like, don't get in the mud with them. They are better fighters than you. You can't win at this, but what you can, quote unquote, win at is being compassionate, self-advocating, setting boundaries, preserving yourself, and not engaging. Because when you stop engaging, you take away their air supply, you take away their validation. And if there's one thing they don't like, is that. And so people who are in the narcissism community will talk about a technique called gray rock. And gray rock happens when you are just almost flat-faced in the face of them. Hey, like, I'm coming home late tonight. Okay. Hey, I don't like this pasta you made. All right. But like, it's they cannot get you into a fight. They can't get you to engage. Now, it requires nerves of steel, And many people will report gray rocking exhausts them. So to which I say, then that's where therapy becomes important. That's where support groups become important. And what's beautiful about the narcissism survival community, narcissistic abuse survival community, is that people in that community have made really amazing, safe online groups. They're not public groups. You have to get curated into the groups, and they really. I'm really heartened to see how much support the community gives to each other. I have an extraordinary community on myself on YouTube, and I love seeing how supportive people are, because the ones who get it are the ones who have been through it. So it really becomes how knowledge is power, and that people then can enact it and recognize, like, wow, there's a different strategy here. And in some cases, give themselves permission to step away. We know stepping away is not always an option. People don't want to divorce their mothers, especially if their parents are older. People don't want to get divorces because it's financially not feasible, or culturally not feasible, or you have children or something like that. Like, you can't always walk away. But I always say, yeah, your soul can walk away. Your physical body may still be present, but your soul can walk away, and you can bring that back to a more authentic space. And so you can give yourself that permission. And it is about permission. One of the key elements, and it's a tough thing to say, that's why I'm saying everything you want to know about narcissism and things you don't, is this idea that this pattern really is not amenable to change. I have to tell you, in 20 years of practice and really 10 years of doing this, a third of my practice is narcissistic individuals. And when I tell you I've made about this much progress with them, and I'm pretty darn proud of that, this much progress, I might see the progress. I could even measure that progress, but no one else around them could, because they're still invalidating them. They're still dismissive. The narcissists love throwing tantrums. They're still throwing their tantrums. They're still being rageful, all the stuff that makes them very unsettling as people. And so I might have gotten them to the point where they say, thank you, or I won't call you at midnight. I guess that's progress, but I'm glad I don't live with them. It's very, very difficult. And so, but what I can tell you is I worked with some of these clients for a very long time, and the amount of progress, it may register in a research study, but I don't think it would register in real life. And, people say, why? Why can't they change? Because what is necessary for change is not only that their core ego insecurity get addressed, but that they're able to engage in self-reflection. We always think of empathy as being, oh, I understand you, I care about you, I'm worried about you. But there's a second piece to empathy that's equally important. And that's the self-reflective capacity. That's the ability to say, how is my behavior, how are my words, how are my intentions impacting this other person? And catch yourself before you say something rotten. We all get it wrong, like I said. But with self-reflective capacity, even if the rotten thing slips out of you, you're like, oh, I am so sorry, and it's genuine, versus just, they pretty much shoot first and ask for apologies later. And the apologies is just so that they can be let off the hook. So because of that lack of self-reflective capacity, now we're asking them to learn a muscle they have never, ever, ever used in their lives. I'm asking them to be mindful. You need to stop and catch yourself before you speak. You don't always get to be the first one in line. Well, to do these things means that they have to tolerate discomfort. And narcissists can't stand discomfort because it rattles that fragile ego, that leg that's been broken in 4 places, right? And so they will avoid discomfort at any cost, which is why we often see a lot of what we call comorbidity of narcissism and addiction. They're so internally uncomfortable all the time that it is very common, not very common, it's not unusual, I should say, for them to use alcohol, drugs, sex, spending, eating, any kind of excess to help them do what we call modulate or lessen their negative emotions. It's just too overwhelming for them. They cannot manage those awful feelings. And so they don't want to do the hard work, because let's face it, therapy requires your willingness to strip away the layers, trust the process of therapy, go in deep, and know you'll be okay. But understand that the process is uncomfortable. All growth is uncomfortable. I have yet in my entire career find someone, a narcissistic individual, who's willing to do that kind of deep dive. Like, can we do this in a non-uncomfortable way or comfortable way? I'm like, no, that path doesn't exist. And because everything's often been very easy for them. What's interesting about narcissistic individuals is if we, on a population level, they make more money. They're more power, they have more success. They often come from families that have money. Not always. I'm sure many listeners are saying, no, my narcissist is broke, and that happens too because they're lazy and too entitled to show up to work, or they get into fights with everyone. So I'm aware of that. But many narcissists are used to being able to buy themselves out of messes, buy themselves out of legal snafus, keep a partner around by throwing money, keeping people financially imprisoned, paying employees a lot and then treating them badly. Now the employees feel stuck. Like I've seen all those techniques used because they do make more money. And then a lot of people will make excuses for them because they got to own up to the fact, like, listen, this is the price of poker. If you're okay with being treated like this, I get that you've got a beautiful home, or I get that you're making twice what your other colleagues make. It's all a Faustian bargain, right? You just sold your soul to the devil. You better make sure you could buy that back, and then realize that, everything comes with a price with these relationships. And there is an opportunity cost for sure for staying in these relationships. Leaving these relationships isn't easy. Narcissists do have a lot of abandonment issues because they're so insecure, so they don't like it. And so they'll really push back. And one of two things will happen. Either they'll fight you leaving them. They'll often try to suck you back in. They will run smear campaigns on you. They will make your life miserable. They might even stalk you. Or they're entirely indifferent. You'll be like, I've just been married to someone for 20 years and they've moved a new girlfriend inside of a week. Yep. Because both situations, attacking you or just replacing you, show the absolute how devoid they are of empathy, connection, caring, all of that. So again, the patterns always add up to always going back to that same place of core insecurity. Now, one of the issues I also see is that people say, oh gosh, if they're so insecure, I feel guilty leaving them. Remember, narcissists are masterful at playing upon guilt, right? Like, oh, I feel bad, or they supported me when I went through school, or, oh, if they're so fragile, maybe I shouldn't leave them. And then I say, now you got to do the deeper dive into your own. I don't like the word codependencies, but like your own fears of conflict, of disruption, of doing you. And remember, one of the worst things we've ever done to women is we do not give them that inner voice of saying, it is okay to choose you. In fact, I highly recommend it. Once you choose you, all the other people in your purview will be okay. And people say, well, that's selfish. It's actually not. Because once a person is authentic and actualized and really good at advocating for themselves, they become brilliant at advocating for others. But there's a lot of guilt because we are so quick to say, well, that woman is selfish because she works, and that woman is selfish because she didn't do this, and that woman is selfish because she didn't do that. And so that all plays out in a narcissistic relationship. And that dynamic of guilt keeps a lot of people in those relationships. The other two dynamics that keep people in narcissistic relationships are hope and fear. The hope that it's going to get better, and the fear of what's going to happen to me if I leave. Will I always be alone? And I look at them and I say, alone seems like a much better deal than this. Can you imagine? You sit home, you can watch what you want on Netflix, you can eat cookies in bed, and no one's screaming at you. But that primitive fear of being alone, and it is primitive. It's not just about, oh yeah, it'd be nice to have my own space, but it's that nihilistic, I'm going to be on my own, I'm going to die alone. Some people saying like, oh my God, these are my best years, no one's ever going to be attracted to me again. Mm-hmm. So again, it comes down to the narcissist is the narcissist, but then it's also about doing your own work, about your own authenticity, about your goodness, about the fact that you're more than enough. Because a narcissistic relationship constantly triggers that existing narrative of I'm not enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not thin enough, I'm not rich enough, I'm not successful enough, I'm not a good enough mother, I'm not a good enough this, I'm not a good enough that. That is prime bait for narcissists because they can run with that. And in fact, what narcissists are great at is in the early phases of the relationship, being really into you. It's called love bombing, and they're all in. But one of the things they're doing then is they're studying all your vulnerabilities. And I promise you, they'll bring them back as weapons. Like, oh, God, all those things you told me about your mother, it turns out you're just like her. And here you'd opened up to them about how difficult that relationship is and was. And now they're equating you to this person who's so difficult or whatever it is. Like you'll say, oh, I've always struggled with my appearance. And then they'll come out with, well, as you get older and your appearance, they'll know exactly how to go for the jugular. And that way they're almost like, they're like elite warriors. because they literally, boom, they know exactly how to hit the target square. At that point, you're so deflated that a lot of people get so psychologically abused that they don't feel the confidence that they could get up there and go back out into the world. And that's another way a lot of people get stuck in these narcissistic relationships, is that absolute sense of deflation. And so they can't move forward from that. And again, that's the work that our biggest mistake is how we educate girls and young women, that instead of, we often waste so much time on other stuff, like teach them their value, their power. And where it starts to fall apart, frankly, is middle school. I think we're doing a damn good job with the K through sixers, but middle school and high school, when everything becomes so appearance oriented, do your lips look right? Do your hips look right? Does this look right? Does that look right? And social media has really contributed to that. Social media is really the thing. Like we've always had an issue with narcissism, but when no social media came out, it was like putting gasoline on an ember. And then we were off to the races. And people are measured by the number of followers they have versus really their soul, their inner world, all of that. So it's a very, it's a complicated, very modern issue, but it's cutting into all of our lives. And some people say, you know what? I love my parents. I love my spouse. I love my kids. I love my job. Everything's great. I can think of about two of those people off the top of my head. But then you sometimes confront it in the grocery store when someone's screaming about how they deserve to be in line ahead of you. You might run into it on an airplane where someone's screaming about wanting a better seat, or you might run into it in traffic where someone is flipping you off on the road. So none of us are immune. Obviously, for some people, it's far, far more horrific because it's their relationship, it's their life, it's their family, it's their job, versus these passing kinds of experiences. And, and I think one thing we've done a really terrible job of in this world is we don't recognize how devastating psychological and emotional abuse are. The way even our conversations up until recently about domestic violence have been like, it's all about black eyes and chipped teeth and broken bones. While that is horrific, and and all victims of physical abuse are also going through psychological abuse, there's a lot of people out there where it's only psychological abuse. And I shouldn't even say only, where it is psychological abuse. Because what they'll say is, you know what? I wish I had the black eye. Because then if I had a black eye, I'd get empathy from the world. But when I'm trying to say this is psychological abuse, they'll often be treated, that's just how relationships are. Sometimes relationships hit rough patches. So the world is gaslighting you. And gaslighting is sort of basically denying your experience. The world is gaslighting you. The world is saying, like, stick it out. Relationships are hard work. Sometimes people get stressed and they didn't really mean it. It's very different, like I said, when you've got the black eye or the bloodied lip. But when it is that psychological abuse, I'm going to be honest with you, the long-term effects of that are actually more devastating because it leaves a person psychologically bruised and with far less support, because many times people aren't empathizing. Oh, you think I had it bad? Many times a mother will say to a daughter going through psychological abuse, especially if the mom's a narcissist, will say, you think it was bad for you? You should have seen back in my day. So it's like constantly having the experience minimized. And many, many people are experiencing psychological abuse. You can't get a restraining order for psychological abuse. That's not enough. And there are many, many, especially women, but there are also some men out there, many women out there who are in psychologically abusive relationships. And the woman finally says, I cannot do this anymore, and starts making efforts to get out, but she can't get a restraining order because the judges and law enforcement's attitude is like, oh gosh, it's just, he's angry. And then she ends up dead. A case like that happened in Ohio about a month ago. So you can't minimize this because narcissists are not able to handle their rage and regulate their emotions. Violence is not unusual. Is it normative? No. But it certainly can happen. And I am willing to sit here and make the point that 100% of domestic abusers are narcissistic. 100%. So if you want to understand domestic abuse, you've got to understand narcissism, because they go hand in hand. And that's not how the system is. It's all about second chances. And it seems like he gets it now. It seems like he's figured it out. And it seems like he's been awakened. He understands now. The heck he does. So them's my thoughts. Do you have any questions? Because I've been yammering on here.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned the idea of codependency isn't one of your favorite things, but it did make me wonder at some point, because that's a word we would all be familiar with, right?
Yeah.
It would seem like certain personalities are drawn to other certain personalities
Mm-hmm.
because there's a yin and a yang that they
Mm-hmm.
pick up on for whatever
Mm-hmm.
reason. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not blaming
Right.
one or the other, but there does seem to be a pattern of people who tend toward codependency or enabling to get
Yes.
into these
Yes. Yes.
relationships.
100%. Because let's face it, the relationship is only going to last because someone sticks around.
Hmm.
Right. Now, here's the bottom line. I am a firm believer that in a significant number of these cases that we just write off as codependency, the person just doesn't have adequate knowledge. Listen to this podcast, talk to someone like me, listen to any of my videos. You're going to definitely then see that this isn't me. Like, because a lot of times a person whose tendency is to be self-blaming, to be enabling, it's what they were taught in the family of origin. I mean, that's the sort of like, it's like anything. It's if you were taught for 20 years 2 + 2 is 5, it's hard to unlearn that lesson. Okay. So it's what they were taught throughout their own lives. And then when they're in the relationship, if somebody really laid it out, like, here's the deal, it's not going to change, da 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 da, everything I just said, they might say, really? And a lot of these so-called codependents, like, I'm out of here. Like, I did not know that. I didn't know this didn't change. I thought it was kind of mean to leave someone when they were down, And so
Mhm.
it's actually, and is there a subset though that would probably fall under that codependent piece? Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think it's much, much smaller than we think. And again, a lot of it is that they might have come from narcissistic families of origin, especially given that high correlation between the high correlation between narcissism and addiction. That a person who's coming from an alcoholic family system, which is often considered to foster codependency, was actually probably also coming from a narcissistic family system. So that's why I'm leery of using the term, because it's almost like immediately we're saying, oh, you're too stupid to leave. They didn't know. And remember, the other thing that's happening at the same time, an individual is enabling the narcissist, so too is the whole world. It's very hard to be the lone voice of dissent. It's very hard to be the one person who's willing to call out the guy who is the team coach, who donates to the community, who is the successful business person or professor or physician. It's very hard to be that lone voice of dissent when everyone's saying, you're so lucky to be married to him. Wow, you have such a good life. You have such a great house. The whole damn world's enabling this guy. So what are you going to be, the one person? A lot of people will definitely falter under that scrutiny. And I'll be frank with you, when they leave that, people often are very alone at that point. It takes a lot of fortitude to say, wow, I've got to blaze a new trail here and meet new people. Because I will tell those people, I will tell people going through that lone voice of dissent, all these enablers, you're not just losing your narcissist, you're losing them too. This is scorched earth. And that is a lot for people to think about. I'm supposed to start again. And I'm like, kind of, yeah, it's going to be a great life if you can. Most people don't feel up to that challenge. They don't feel like they have the right to go ahead and do that. And a lot of people can't if they're financially dependent, if they have kids, if they have infirm parents. They're like, okay, and you know what? And this is going to sound a bit gruesome. Sometimes people will find if something intervenes, the narcissist passes away, their lives improve instantaneously.
Wow. I think it's difficult for people to empower themselves because I understand what you're saying, having had people in my life who were in really unhealthy
Mm-hmm.
relationships, and I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't understand where they were coming from. But what's interesting is if you can get them out of that situation and get them some perspective, a lot of them will begin to actually see it. It's like when they're in the frame, they can't see the picture, but
Right.
sometimes it's the getting them away from it so that they can see, if they're not so embroiled in the need to be the rescuer, to be
Right.
the whatever.
Yeah. It is. These are old roles, right? So if you've always been the rescuer, it's hard to stop being the rescuer because part of your identity is locked up in being the rescuer.
Yeah.
To which I say, you can still be a rescuer. You just got to rescue the right stuff. I mean, like go rescue people. And I hate the word rescuer because I think it demeans the person you're helping. But like, if you want to be a rescuer, work in an animal shelter. If you want to be a rescuer, volunteer at a program that helps kids in foster care. If you want to be a rescuer, go work in your community. Those places could use your rescuing energy. But trying to rescue someone who's arrogant and sells you the story of, oh, my childhood was so very difficult, which is why I behaved so badly. You ain't converting that person. So save that sort of rescue missionary style there's so much rescuing that could happen in this world today.
Yeah.
Take it to the sources that could benefit.
That's great. The one other thought that came to my mind was the empathy gap. It seems, again, I'm kind of reiterating my same thought. It's not really a question, it's an observation that you have the narcissist who has no empathy. Like there seems to be a real
Limited,
lack of conscience and
limited.
empathy. But then you have the partner of that person is the person who has a ridiculous amount of conscience and almost like too much empathy. They don't know the boundary
Sometimes.
of what healthy empathy is. I
So
see
you mean,
that.
so we get into this world of the empath. Okay. So the empath is somebody who is, you're right. They have, I don't want to say too much empathy, but they hand it out very easily. It's like standing on a corner just giving dollar bills away just because you happen to have them in your pocket. Like, I'd hold on to those if I were you. So I don't know that there's ever an undeserving recipient of empathy. Like, I think I give empathy to my narcissistic clients. I give empathy to the checker at the grocery store, empathy to anyone I meet, because that's a natural human experience. It's really, though, what the return on that's going to be, right? So if you're giving empathy and you're not getting any back, so then you double down and try to say, I'm going to give you even more empathy. That's a fool's errand, right? Now you're throwing bad money after good. Is that you start to recognize, like, this relationship is not reciprocal. It's not mutual. It's not, I mean, this isn't healthy. Like, empathy is a two-way street, right? So if it's that more doubling down on empathy ain't going to make it work. So it's really understanding how to cut your losses and say, wow, other relationships I have are reciprocal and mutual, healthy. Not getting it back is how to teach people that if it's not being returned, then this is like, it's like a bank where you put money and they give your money away to somebody else and you can never get it back. Like,
Yeah.
you not go to that bank. And so, I think that's the real struggle there, is that, yes, I think empaths very much struggle with that because they'll feel a lot of guilt about pulling out of one of these relationships, saying, no, they just need my empathy. And then you're right. Then we start cascading potentially into that zone of codependency. Is that to really say to someone, if I'm looking at you straight in the eye and I'm telling you they are never going to mirror this back, you are not going to see this empathy back. They're going to continue raging at you, deceiving you, and all the rest of it. Please help me understand what the end of this looks like. What are you expecting? And that's when they really have to look into the abyss and say, blah, 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 hope, blah, 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 fear. And then that's okay. But then I need them to say that out loud. Like, own it. You're afraid of being alone. I can work with that, right? We can work with this idea that you're afraid of being alone. Okay, let's do a mental experiment. What does being alone look like versus this? Well, I'm going to lose all my friends because if you're not married, you can't be in the group of people I hang out with. Okay, they've all been enabling him. How does that feel? Like, you have something to work with, but you've got to push the person to really own up to it. And I'll be totally frank with you. Many people have said, I like living in a big house. I like fitting into a group of people. And I say, that's great. You need to know that. Now we're talking about radical acceptance. Now we're talking about the fact that this particular relationship is never going to be a source of empathy. It's not going to be a source of emotional support or love or warmth or kindness. Okay? This particular relationship is transactional and material. And you're going to have to cultivate other spaces in your life with friends, maybe family, maybe spiritual spaces, maybe in your community, where you get that empathy need met, but recognize that this well it isn't going to give you water. And I don't have enough fingers and toes to count the number of people who've made that deal, but it's an eyes open deal. And they're like, no, I know I'm never going to get empathy from this. And I get that. And there's days it still hurts. Like, you can't get out of this unscathed. Like, it's not like, oh, now that I figured it out, it's all fine. It's not fine. Somebody invalidating you. Once the narcissist starts to feel that quiet sense that you've actually kind of pulled away, that you're not really that interested anymore, then they don't like that. Like, they sense your pull away. They sense they don't have the same power. They sense that their invalidation's not working anymore, though they'd never call it invalidation. But they sense that they've lost some power. And then it's game on. Like, they really will make it difficult for you. So it's often difficult to disengage from these. Again, it really is nerves of steel. It's saying, yeah, I mean, whatever. So that's where the gray rock takes some time to just be like, you sort of view them as an annoying fly in the room, and you'd sort of look at it for a while, and you may change rooms or try to open the window and hope it goes outside, kind of thing. So It's that there's that piece to it, that many people do recognize it for what it is, and they try it. Some people do it for another year or two, recognizing that they're signing up for something. They're like, now that I really know what this is gross. Like, it feels really transactional. Like, now I'm out, and that's their process. I can't put a timeline on this. I can't look at someone and say, you have to get out. And say, I can look at people and say, this is very unhealthy, and this is not going to be good for you, and you are going to get sick in the long term. And we know that people in narcissistic relationships are putting their health at risk. The long-term effects are just any kind of stress-related condition, whether it's autoimmune kind of symptomatology, or whether it's just, headaches and other body aches and all the physical problems that come from stress. This takes a toll on people, and I'm convinced it actually probably takes years off their lives. I think it's that stressful.
I would totally agree. Well, I feel like we could talk about this for a lot longer.
Thank you.
But of course, I appreciate your wisdom and your information, because any change starts at a point, right?
Yep.
And I would love for this video to be a point of change.
I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. So how can people get in contact with you?
So please, I would say to anyone, like, we've given like a nice, great overview today. I thank you for this. But if you really want to do the deep dive into narcissism, please go to my YouTube channel. It is nothing but, like, gosh, we probably are getting closer to 100 videos now, like every tiny sub element of narcissism too, different kinds of relationships, all of that. So go to that, and that's at Dr. Ramani, DoctorRamani. And all of my social media is that too. You can follow me on Instagram, post every day, sometimes do Instagram lives and YouTube lives, which is a chance to get your questions answered in real time. In fact, I'm doing one pretty much every week at this point. And then go to my website, which is drramani.com, DOCTOR-RAMANI.com. It is like a real, it's a lot of resources there. It connects you to all my social media and everything, but there's also some very really good, useful other resources. And then people really want to do the deep dive, they can read my books. I have 2 books on the topic. One is called Should I Stay or Should I Go? Surviving a Relationship with a Narcissist. And the second book is called Don't You Know Who I Am? How to Stay Sane in an Era of Narcissism, Entitlement and Incivility. Both books are very timely. Should I Stay or Should I Go is much more geared towards sort of an intimate relationship, like a spouse or a partner. Don't You Know Who I Am is definitely a much wider look at the phenomenon, and both also exist as audiobooks if that's a preference. Books are available at your bookseller, and nowadays, on Amazon or any online bookseller. So, all of these give more information on this if this is something relevant to you.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for sharing your valuable time. I know you're very busy.
My pleasure.
I'm so grateful that I met you and had the opportunity to actually engage with you in person, and then to have you on my show. I appreciate you greatly.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Now, everyone, subscribe down below, and please click the links to find Dr. Ramani. Everything that she shared will be down there. You can click over to her YouTube, check her out. If there's anyone in your life that this remotely reminds you like they need some help, or this sounds like something they need to hear, please be a community member and share this message, because we need to be the change we want to see, right? Find out who you can help, share the message, be the change. We can make an impact in our lives and the lives of others if we just choose to open up and share. So if you found this helpful, don't forget to subscribe. Go over to Dr. Ramani's YouTube as well. Thank you again for joining us for this episode, Dr. Ramani. And thank you, Tribe, for joining us for this health and wellness conversation. We look forward to seeing you all again next time. Take care.